His word my hope secures. Hear my shield and portion as long as life endures. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns. Unending love, amazing grace. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns. Unending love, amazing grace. The earth shall soon dissolve like snow. The sun forbear to shine. But God who called me here below will be forever mine. Will be forever mine. 'Cause you are forever mine. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, Lord. Thank you for bringing us here safely just to worship you, God, just to praise you as one family, Lord. We ask that you give Charles a good word for him to speak and touch the lives of your children, God. You soften their hearts today, Lord. And we thank you. We give you all the praise and all the glory. In your name we pray. Amen.
It kind of feels like it needs like words behind that music, doesn't it? Like a little like buy more stuff. I don't know. I'm not on the worship team, and there's a good reason for that. Welcome back. It's part 4 of our 6-part series about what makes you happy. Now we're going to start this week the same way we have the last couple of weeks. If you're new, if this is your first week here, we're about to have a little quiz. Now, here's the good thing. If you're the first time you're being here, you haven't studied for this quiz. You don't have any of the answers for it, so I don't expect anything from you. But the rest of you, I'm expecting big things from you. So let me just ask the first question on the quiz. It is, what makes you happy? No thing. Hey, good job. That's awesome. You guys did so good on that. No thing makes you happy. That's exactly right. In fact, what we've talked about over the last couple of weeks is that it's more about who than a what. Very good. And in fact, to quote Dr. Seuss, if you will, it's probably a who or two that's true, right? And so that's really what makes us happy. It's no thing that can possibly do it. It's actually somebody in our life or someone in our life, some who makes us happy. All right, here it is. Question number 2. What makes you happy? Oh, that was the tougher one. Let's try it one more time. Sewing. Yes, sewing. That's exactly right. And I don't mean like needle pulling thread sort of a thing, you know, if you're thinking that you're going to sing like the Do Re Mi song or something like that. No, what we're talking about is like farming, like you throw the seeds down into the ground and you sow something. In fact, really what we've talked about over the last couple of weeks is that Jesus said that our happiness is actually an outcome, right? Based on what it is that you're doing, you have an outcome that becomes a part of it. And so your happiness is based on things that you do. In fact, let me just say it a whole different way. In order to be happy, you've got to sow for it, right? And some of you got that. You got to sow for it. And so this is really, really important because Jesus is saying, listen, whatever it is that you do today, whether you're intentionally trying to sow unhappiness into your life, you're going to reap the benefits of this 5, 10 years from now. So if you're in a place where you're going, you know what, I'm just really, really unhappy. If you look back, you're like, you know what? The decisions that I made a month ago, 2 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, I know this is hard, teenagers in the room, all right? But the decisions that you make today affect your future happiness, right? And that's what we saw. In fact, now, this is one of those things that shows up sometimes, is that sometimes when we're going a direction and we start sowing, we have this thought that pops into our head, and we're like, I think that this is what will make me happy, right? I thought this would make me happy. Anybody ever here thought that, right? You thought that the thing that you were doing, that this was the thing that was gonna make you happy. Here, if you don't hear much of anything else, if you tune out in just a minute, I want you to catch this point right here, and that is that just because that you think something would make you happy, right? It probably means that you shouldn't believe everything you think. Right? You probably shouldn't believe everything that you think, because if we make all of our decisions based on I think this and I think that, and what shows up later is, then we were probably wrong about what we were thinking. And you know, there's no area that this shows up more than in the area of money, right? We've all thought that age-old question, that age-old idea of, you know, I think that money might make me happy. I know, some of you just went, oh, the preacher just said money. Like, that's like worse than some of the other words that a preacher could possibly say, right? Like, those preachers that are out there that, like, they drop some, like, colorful language sort of a thing, and I think the word money might be worse than some of those colorful language sort of pieces on stuff, because everybody goes, oh, here we go again. Church just talking about money. All they want is all my money. And the reason that the hairs on the back of our neck bristle up when we start to hear money talked about at church is because there is this connection in our mind between money and happiness. And when the church begins to talk about it, we start going, well, we start hearing, well, God doesn't want me to be happy with my money. He wants to be happy with my money. So I'm supposed to give God my money. Now listen, we're not going to say that today, all right? And that's not what we're going to talk about when we talk about this, but we are going to talk about this idea about, does money make us happy? And I know that you've all heard it lots and lots of times. You've heard preachers, you've heard other people say it till they were blue in the face, that money doesn't make you happy. Money doesn't make you happy. And you've probably stood there and you've gone, yep, that's right. And in the back of your mind and deep down, you're kind of like me and you're like, excuse me, if there's a test for this, could I please apply? I would like to try and see if money would make me happy. I would like for you to give me all of your money, and I will see if I can't figure out how to be happy with your money. Right? Everybody's like, amen to that one, right? We'd all like to sign up for that test. But at the end of the day, we all have this belief, we have this connection, this thought about money and happiness that exists inside of our life. But here's where I think we mess up. We center all of our thoughts about this around this one word. The one word of more. If I simply had more money, then pardon my really bad English if you're an English teacher that's in the room, right? If I had more money, then I would be more happy. If I had more money, I would be more happy. Because we understand that there's this correlation between money and happiness, and so we think that the correlation is the word more. Now, just to kind of get all of our heads in the game on this, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions. Now listen, I don't want you to answer these questions out loud, all right? I don't want you to even write it down. I don't want you to elbow your neighbor next to you and say, hey, this is my answer for the question. This is just a mental exercise for you for just a second. But I would like to know, all right, here's the question. How much more money would it take to make you happy? How much more money would it take to make you happy? I mean, if more is the correlation, right? If that's the connecting factor between money and happiness, then you should know an answer to this, right? There should be something that you know. In fact, let me just tell you, I already know your answer to this question. You're like, wait a second, Charles, you do? Yeah, I do. I'm going to tell you the answer in just a moment. I'm going to tell you what every single one of you thought in your mind that the answer to this question was. But first, I just want to back up, and I want to remind you about something else really important that we've said in this series that I think plays in with what we're going to talk about today. And that is this, that happy people, all happy people have something, right? They have peace. We talked about this a couple different times, that they have peace on three different places. Peace in three different places. The first one is they have peace with themselves, right? They're okay with who it is that they are. They have peace with other people, right? That they're not in conflict with other people. You cannot be in conflict with other people and have peace. It's not an easy thing to do. In fact, I would say it's pretty much impossible. And most of them, most people who are happy people, who are at peace, not only do they have peace with themselves, not only do they have peace with other people, but they also have peace with God. And so we have all of this, and so let me just, using that idea of peace for just a second, let me phrase the question a little bit different. How much how much more money would you need in order to have peace? How much more would you need in order to have peace? In order to say, hey, you know what, my kids are a mess, but you know what, it's okay, I got a raise, and hey, I got more. Right? Or, you know what, my marriage is falling apart right now, but it's okay because I've got fill in the blank, whatever it is. Now, how much more money do you need in order to have peace? Now, earlier I told you that I know the answer for this. I know the answer that all of you really are thinking, and some of you are like, I'm not so sure that he really knows an answer for what it is that I'm thinking. Here it is. You ready for it? More than I currently have. Right? More than I currently have, because where I'm at right now is not the answer. And so we think that this idea of it's more than what I currently have, but it doesn't really matter how much money that you have, right? It doesn't matter where you are in life, and it doesn't matter what you drive or what you wear or where you live, because for the rest of your life, if you connect more money and more happiness, if that's the place that you see the correlation at, then you will always answer this question of what's going to give me peace more than what I currently have. But here's the thing, and here's why I'm so glad you're here today. Because I want to help us to understand that more is not the correlation that exists when we talk about money and happiness. There is a correlation between money and happiness. Now you're like, whoa, preacher, I did not think that you were going to say that. But there is. There is a correlation. There is a correlating factor between these two things, and the word is not more. In fact, it's this one. It's the word management. management. Now, I think the challenge to everything that we're going to say today, even after you know the correlating word, I think the challenge is that at the end of the day, I think most of you are going to do this and you go, yeah, Charles, I agree with that. And we're going to have this kind of head nodding moment with everything. But the problem is that while we might have a head nodding, we don't have much heart nodding that goes along with it. And I think for most of us, as we listen to what we're going to talk about today, that if we could figure out how to move it from a head knowledge, a nodding along with what's going on, and into a deep, intimate heart knowledge of this piece, an agreement in our hearts that transforms how we look at the resources that God has given to us and about where it is that we place our confidences, I think it will totally change everything for us. And I think you'll walk out of here and you'll have a peace that perhaps you didn't walk in here with when it comes to this idea. This thing about talking about money. So I gave you a different M word. The M word was management, right? Because it's not about how much more money that you have, but it is about how you manage the money that you have. You say, well, Pastor Charles, I'm not really sure that I'm following you. Well, let me say it just a little bit different. I like these Dr. Seuss kind of statements. They kind of stick a little bit better, so I've got one for you again. It's not the amount that counts, it's the management that's the statement. It's not the amount that counts, it's the management that's the statement. In other words, most of you, if you were thinking about this, you know families that have more than you do. And when you look at that family, what you realize is that they're not happy. And then you know families who have more than that family who has more than you do, and you go, well, they're not happy either. And then you see families that have less than you do, and they're not happy either. And you're like, well, where on this scale does happiness begin to show up if more and more and more and more doesn't result in happiness? And then you see this other family, maybe they have as much as you, maybe they have less than you, maybe they do have more than you. And their family loves hanging out together. They love spending time together. And it's not about the amount of money that they're spending doing something. It's about the fact that they just enjoy being together. In fact, some of those families who have the most on the more end, they have the most extravagant vacations, and their kids don't even want to go with them. Because there's no peace there. They're chasing after something. You know, when we talk about this idea of managing and how it can lead to extreme unhappiness if we don't manage our money well, when Stephanie and I first got married, we wanted a beautiful rug for our beautiful wood floors that we had just laid down, because that's what you do, right? You cover the beautiful wood floors with a beautiful rug. I had no idea. I just done carpet to begin with, if that was the case. And so we went to the rug store, and I was flabbergasted by how expensive a rug was. I couldn't believe it. And then off to the side, they said, hey, listen, 0% interest for 12 months. Anybody ever seen one of those signs? Oh, yeah. I thought it was brilliant. We buy now, we pay later. And boy, did we pay later. So 12 months came and went, and we missed the deadline. And the bill showed up in the next month, on that 13th month. And now we owed 1.5 times what we would have paid for it to begin with. Do you want to know what adds stress to your marriage? When you owe 1.5 times, and apparently it was your fault that the bill didn't get paid on time. There's nothing that will stress a brand new marriage more than that, I'm telling you. And really, you're disgusted with yourself when that happens, right? Because what you know at the end of the day is you're like, oh, that was just a poor management of the resources that I had, and now I'm paying for a really poor decision. You know, I think most of you probably know this, but finances is one of the top 3 reasons that couples end up in a divorce, right? And because that stress just continues to happen over and over again, and that mismanagement shows up over and over again, finally, one of the partners in the midst of all the stress just decides that I don't like you anymore because of all the things that are going on, and they begin to part ways. And you know, I just want to give you a side note. If this is you and you're in this situation right now where you're combating over this sort of mismanagement that's been going on, that when you split apart, that's not the answer. It doesn't solve the problems of the mismanagement. It doesn't fix the other person's mismanagement if that's where the source of all of the angst lies and all of this. Actually, what it does is it magnifies it, because now all of a sudden you're relying on them in order to help pay the bills that they weren't doing to begin with, but they're no longer with you and they don't feel the same sort of commitment in the relationship in order to do it. And so now you added more stress on top of it, and you're doing all these extra things. All right, I'm going to back off my soapbox for a second. But I think you get the idea that that just doesn't solve any of the problems. We've said this earlier in the series, and I want you to file this away as we're talking about this today, but here it is that anything that undermines your peace will undermine your happiness. Anything that undermines your peace, anything that undercuts your road, your peace, anything that undermines it, takes away from your happiness. Which means this: if you mismanage your money, you are ultimately undermining your peace. It doesn't matter how much more or less that you have on that spectrum. If you're mismanaging it, you're undercutting your peace. And really, if we're honest about this is a cultural problem. This is a place where we as Americans probably struggle more than anywhere else, and that is this idea of money and happiness, and this idea of more, because as Americans we're fed that more will make us happy. So what are we supposed to do? You know, it's really interesting because Jesus talked about this issue. Jesus says something so staggering and so earth-shattering that I thought we'd just spend a few minutes today looking at it together as we talk about this idea of happiness and money. And I think it's so incredibly true that if we'll grasp it, it will help us all to maybe leave here hitting a reset button on how it is that we view our money. So if you have your Bibles, I'd like for you to open them up to Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. If you don't have it, I'll put it up on the screen here in just a second. Now we're back in Matthew, and we were here a few weeks ago talking about Jesus' most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, and we saw his opening to the sermon, which was 8 blessed or happy statements, right? How to be happy. He gave 8 guidelines about how to do it. And in the same sermon, Jesus drops this one-liner, this one verse that we're going to look at today that is really pretty incredible. And we're going to do a couple of things with it. The first one is we're going to read the entire passage. And then we're going to go back and we're going to pick some of the things apart that are in it. And it's one big, huge idea. But I think it'll help us as we attack this idea of money and happiness. Jesus said, He said, "No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You can only serve one master." And Jesus finishes off this thought by saying, you cannot serve both God and money. So let's go back and look at some of the things that Jesus said in this. He opens up and he says, no one can serve 2 masters. And I don't know about you, but I kind of think when I read that, well, I don't really know if this applies to me. Right? I don't live in that world. We don't have masters and servants in the world that we're in today. I know Jesus was in the first century, and he was in the gigantic empire of Rome where they had masters and servants, but we don't have that today. So I'm not really sure that I think that applies to me. I kind of think the same thing, and then I started realizing that that's true until I have to pay my property taxes, right? Or that's true until rent's due on my house, right? That's true until we all have that moment where we realize that there is something that we're beholden to. Okay, you're right, Pastor Charles. Maybe I do have some things that I, have to take care of, and I may have thought that nobody could really tell me what to do, when to do, but if the HOA gives me a bill, I probably have to pay it. There's not much I can do about that. It's kind of the way it goes. But then Jesus has this super extreme statement, right? He says, listen, you'll either hate the one and love the other, and you're like, oh, Jesus. Isn't there some middle ground here? I mean, love and hate, they're totally on opposite sides of the spectrum. Maybe there's somewhere, and Jesus is no, listen, you're going to either love one and hate the other. That's the only way that this works. And I was like, oh, man, goodness gracious, Jesus, that's kind of crazy. And Jesus goes on, because he says, listen, you can only serve one master. All right, Jesus. I mean, I don't know if I'm with you on the extremes, but just being able to serve one master, I kind of get that. I mean, if I had multiple masters, this is where, that argument against getting married to multiple women, right? I can't imagine this idea of having multiple masters in my life. I'm not saying that the wife is the master of the household. I'm not saying that. Maybe implying it, but certainly not saying it. Listen, Jesus says you can only serve one master, and I think most of us would go, okay, you know what, Jesus, that kind of makes sense. And then he gives the Jesus juke, right? So everybody's sitting there, they kind of know where this thing's all going, they've heard everything that's going on. They're like, yeah, Jesus, I'm with you. In fact, this is the moment where, when Jesus was teaching, I think it would be fun to crowd watch. Right? Anybody here a people watcher? I love people watching. And I think this is the moment where everybody's writing, and then Jesus says this next part about you cannot serve both God and money. And I think it's what? Right? Everybody in the whole crowd's I didn't see that one coming, Jesus. You're talking about serving masters and about loving one and hating the other and this, that, and the other. And now you drop in God and money? What? Where did this come from, Jesus? And I mean, that's not really what I think about when I think about, I'm okay, you can't serve both God and Satan, right? Oh, totally makes sense, Jesus, that one I get, right? Can't serve both God and Satan. Or whatever it is that you want to put as opposite of God, right? Can't serve both good and evil if you want to go that direction on stuff. You can't serve whatever it is that you want to put as in opposition to God. Great, that makes a lot of sense. And Jesus said, no, I said, you cannot serve both God and mammon. Wait, Charles, you just dropped a different word in there. What's that word? Because it's not really, Jesus didn't say money. He said this word mammon, right? M-A-M-M-O-N. I put it on the screen for you because it's not a word that we use all the time. But in the Greek, this had this idea of, basically it means stuff. Right? It's all of your stuff. It includes money, but it's much broader than just money, right? It's all this stuff. It's everything that you want. It's all the stuff that you already have. It's the money that you get in order to buy other stuff. It's the stuff that you haven't even purchased yet. Stuff that's mammon. It's just all your stuff. And Jesus says, listen, you can only serve one of two masters. Either you'll serve God or you'll serve your stuff. So in Jesus' way of thinking, and you don't have to agree with this is what Jesus was saying. Jesus says, he says, listen, your chief competitor for your devotion isn't Satan. Your chief devotion isn't for sin. Your chief devotion isn't for evil. Man, Jesus knew us so well. Jesus says the chief competitor for your heart, is, I'm not going to tell you the answer just yet. Why do we connect this word more with money? Here's why. Because more gets us more stuff. Right? More equals more stuff. Because the more money we have, the more stuff that we can get. In fact, some of us even struggle with this idea. I'm going to save more of my money so that if there's a point later on when I need something more, I have more to go get from in order to get my more. Right? It's true. It's true. And that stuff, that mammon, that money, is the chief competitor for your heart and for my heart. This is 2,000 years ago that Jesus was saying this to the crowd of people that were sitting there. Listen, the Home Shopping Network didn't even exist then. Amazon didn't have Prime delivery that was coming to your house in just a couple of days, and there weren't all these algorithms that showed you all the stuff that you needed, right, when you were on your computer. That really frustrates me. I scroll through those pictures of all the stuff that they think that I need, and I agree, I need all of that stuff. But this is so insightful, right? But sometimes we hear all of this hyperbole, this big language from Jesus, right? He says masters and serve and hate and love, and you probably think what I think, right? And I kind of get what Jesus is going at, but Jesus, I don't really love my money. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that I love my money. Jesus says, well, time out. He says, you've read too fast about what I just said. Well, I did? Yeah. He says, keep reading. He says, no one can serve two masters because you'll hate the one and love the other. Yeah, that's what I was just talking about. He says, no, keep reading. Keep reading. And he says, you'll be devoted to the one. What? He says, you'll be devoted to. So Jesus, when you say that I would love my stuff and love my money, what you're talking about is devotion? He says, yeah. What's devotion? Well, devoted is like this real strong attachment to. Devotion is where there's like this quest for something. Ooh, careful. Jeez, you're getting close. Devotion is when it becomes the filter, the primary decision-making filter, that when I begin to make decisions, that's what I look through. My daughter told me I had to tell this story. I didn't write it in there because I wasn't going to share it, but I'm going to share it. I'm devoted to my wife. I love my wife a whole lot. And she affects my decision-making filter all the time. Sometimes very positively, but this story. So on Wednesday, my wife's battery went dead when she went to go pick up my child from the preschool. Wonderful Miss Shar helped to jump her vehicle. I'm so thankful that you were there so she could get home. And on Thursday, my wife begins to talk to me about her now broken car. Husband, what are we going to do to fix my car? I don't know. I don't fix cars. I think it's just the battery. Oh, you're probably right. Well, can't we just go get a new one? Okay. So Friday, together, I follow her in her vehicle in case it's something else that's gone wrong to O'Reilly's to get a new battery. I also know that O'Reilly's can test to see if it's the battery when we get there. They test it, they go, yep, it's the battery. I show up. She says, yep, the guy said it's the battery. I said, okay, well, let's go get the battery in there and we'll pop a new battery in. She said, great. I go in to go get the battery. The guy says, hey, here's the battery. Have you got the old one out? And I give you this one at the discounted price. Oh, I haven't done that yet. He says, okay. I said, well, can I just borrow some tools to do this? He says, sure. So I go back out to the car to figure out where the battery is at. I open up the trunk, or I open up the hood. You know what's not underneath the hood? A battery. There's no battery underneath the hood. So we YouTube, and the battery is in the back seat. No, not in the back seat. Actually, you have to move the entire seat. You have to take a floorboard piece off of the car. Yep, that's right. A floorboard piece to which I did not have the little screw that I had to go get. That was $20 to go buy. Go in and buy this little piece in order to take this little thing off. And they had made this battery well in the back of the car that sat underneath the floorboard right there. And by the way, when I went back inside to finally get it, an hour and a half later of being in the parking lot at O'Reilly's, I said to the guy, hey, my wife said that on your website it says that you change batteries. He said, oh, yeah, we'll change any battery that are easily accessible. I said, oh. He said, yeah, yours says professional only on there. I was like, now you tell me. He claims he told my wife. She says she never heard it, right? But here's the thing. Her dad was amazing at fixing things. And so in her mind, she thinks that I should be great at fixing things. By the way, I think I'm 0 for 10 on fixing things in my house. If you haven't been around for a while, there are great stories. They show up all the time about times that I am not capable of fixing something, right? But my wife had this filter about that I could do it. And so looking through her filter and my devotion to her, I made really bad choices. And that was, instead of calling somebody to come take care of the whole thing for me, right? I know, Sean, I should have just called you to start off with. It would have been so much easier. I tried to do it myself. And 3.5 hours later, we have a new battery, and the car is somewhat running. Sean, maybe we'll talk after service. But listen, that's devotion, right? It affects the decisions that we make because we look through that filter. And Jesus says, you may not like the word love, right? But let's be honest, we're all pretty devoted to our stuff. And even worse, we're pretty devoted to our desire for our stuff. And while we may all say, you know what, I don't bow down. I don't bow down to my money. I don't know that I would say that. But when we take a look and we use this word and this idea of devotion to money and devotion to our stuff, and we measure it against our devotion to any other thing, like, I don't know, say God, I think we would all say, you know what? Yeah, I probably am devoted to my stuff. Probably do have some devotion that goes there. In other words, listen, God says, I want your devotion. But your devotion can only go one of two places. Your stuff or me. You either love one and hate the other, because you can't serve two masters. So, let me ask kind of a pesky, meddlesome question, right? Has your desire, well, let's just use the word devotion, right? Use Jesus' term for a second. Has your devotion for something ever caused you to do something? Now, this is a pretty silly question because I think most of us would all go, yes. Yes, for all of us, but I'm going somewhere with this, so just hang with me here, and when I get to the end of it, you're going to be like, oh, I got you. I'm somewhat setting you up, all right? I'm somewhat tricking you on what this is, so just so you know ahead of time. Now, it's not a trick because I'm telling you this is what it is. But has your desire, right, that devotion ever caused you to do something stupid? Now, I'm not calling you stupid, all right? Right? I'm just asking if it's ever caused you to do something stupid. And the answer for all of us is a resounding what? Yes. Of course it has. Of course it has. We've all done those impulse buys. We've all bought that stuff that afterwards that we had like buyer's remorse for it, right? We've all had that moment where we went into debt for something that you don't even have anymore, right? You may even still be paying for it and you don't even have it anymore. And we just think about that, and we think about this dynamic that inside of us there's this desire, and common sense says, you know, I really shouldn't do that. I've already got 1 or 2 or 10 pairs of shoes. Oh, sorry, ladies, that one may have been a little bit too close. Right? Or maybe I've already got an amazing car, a great car, it runs. I mean, it's perfectly good, but you know that other car. that other truck. It's really nice. And all of a sudden you find that there's this desire in you for something else. And you act on it. And when you look back, you go, oh, that was so stupid. Why did I ever do that? You had that moment where you thought something would make you happy. So let's think about that for a minute. What is that? It's a desire. It's an equation to our devotion to our stuff. Devotion for our stuff. And in those moments where we had those impulse buys, we weren't the boss of ourselves anymore. Right? We were mastered by something else. Jesus is way smarter than you think he is, because here's what he wrote. He said, listen, the chief competitor for the throne of your life is sometimes your desire to acquire. It's your desire, it's my desire for stuff. It has the power to enslave us. And listen, when you're enslaved, when you're in slavery, you're not happy. It doesn't matter how much money you make. When you're enslaved, you're not happy. I think this is really pretty obvious, right? It's pretty common. But have you ever stopped to wonder, why do we do this? Why does this happen? How does this begin in our world? And it begins and ends with this word right here. Discontentment. Discontentment. That's a really powerful thing, because discontentment ensures that I'm never satisfied with what I have, because I know what you have and I know what there is to have. Right? And there's this thing that drives discontentment, right? It's this word right here, awareness. Awareness. Right? Because as soon as I become aware that what there is to have, I become discontent with what I have. All of a sudden, I used to be fine with my old phone, but now the new phone, right? It has 3 cameras. Mine only has 1 camera on it. And so all of a sudden I begin to dream about how much better I could do things with 3 cameras as opposed to 1 camera. And all of a sudden this discontentment begins to step in. Now most of us, we can hold on for a little bit, right? The first time that the commercial shows up, the first time that something shows up, we're like, oh, that's nice, but I'm just not gonna, and then our friend has it. And we get to touch it. We get to smell it. And oh, that discontentment just goes wild at that point. Now, part of what drives discontent is this word right here, greed, right? Greed. Now, Andy is much meaner than I am, because Andy Stanley in his book says you guys are all a bunch of greedy little pigs. In fact, he calls all of us a bunch of greedy little pigs. And I'm not going to say that to you today, all right? So just know, Andy called you that, I didn't, okay? Just so that we're clear on that, I would never say that that's who you guys are. But I do want to give you Jesus' definition of greed real quick. Jesus said this, and we're not going to go there, look at it in Scripture. You can hook me up later. But Jesus said that greed is simply the assumption that everything is for my consumption. The assumption that everything is for my consumption. Greed is this: if it gets placed in my hands, it must be for me. And I can choose to give some to you, right? Aren't I generous? Because I gave you some too, but really, I didn't have to give you any, because really, once it's placed in my hands, it's mine. And that was Jesus' definition. He says, listen, if you assume that everything that comes your way, that everything that is around you is for your consumption, that's greed. And here's the problem with greed. Greed is an appetite, right? The desire for stuff, the devotion to stuff is an appetite that's never fully and finally satisfied, so that if you're driven by discontentment, if you're aware, and if you live with the assumption that everything that comes your way is for consumption, you're going to spend everything that comes your way on you, or maybe this is where it happens, on your family. Because now, if I spend it on my family, aren't I a good person? Because I'm taking care of my family with all of these things, and I'm giving them everything that it is. But that's still not happening. And technically, here's what happens because we're Americans, because we're Canadians, because we're whatever, we live in the West, and this is Western thought, is that we spend to the limit and then beyond. Right? And what shows up is this happy little word in our life. In fact, this word makes everybody happy, right? Say it on the count of, put it up on the screen for me. Say it on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. That doesn't sound very happy. Right? Debt. Here's what I want you to hear today. I want is better than I owe. I want is better than I owe. You see, when you want something and you don't have it, there is a tension. It exists. Right? And we've all lived long enough to know which of these two tensions is better, about the I want it or I owe against it. And when I want it, it's an issue between me and God. Right? God, here's what I want. God, I'm praying for this. God, could you please this, that, and the other? And we have this tension between us and God about, God, why aren't you doing this? When we step across the line, and even though God was saying to us, I know that you want that, but you can't do it right now. You don't need it right now. Hey, I'm going to do everything I can to take care of all of your needs and desires and everything, but you need to understand that you can't do that right now. When we step across the line into the I owe as opposed to the I want, right? Something changes. And what changes is no longer a conversation between me and God about, God, I want this, I want this, I want this. Now it's a conversation between me and somebody else. Because now I owe to them. Whoever it is that I borrowed from in order to get what it was that I wanted, I now owe to them. And here's where it gets even worse. Whereas this was a conversation between me and God. God, if you're a Jesus follower, move sides. And he becomes on the side of the one that you owe to. And you're like, whoa, time out, God, I thought you were on my team. And he said, no. He said, when we were having this conversation, I told you don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. He said, you made the stupid decision, and that doesn't mean that I'm not going to be on their side. He said, I was always on the side of the person that you're going to owe to, because that's the right thing to do. If you're a Jesus follower, the thing that you do is you pay off your debts and you pay off the things that you owe, because that's the right thing to do. That's the way that I would do it. It's the way that I paid off my debts. In fact, I had such a huge debt that existed. He said, I sent Jesus to pay off the debt that existed. God says, I'm always on the side of where you owe. That's justice. We go, oh, well, I don't know. Listen, your devotion to your desire can lead you to slavery. I don't think any of us that are here today would say, I want to be in slavery for my family. I want my family to be in slavery. None of us wants that. None of us wants to have that master over us that way.